We are delighted to be in the presence of Saskia Goldschmidt, author of the wonderful novel Shocked Earth, published by Saraband Publishing House in a translation of Antoinette Fawcett.
My name is Saskia Goldschmidt and I am born and raised in Amsterdam. In fact, I have been raised just 7-minute walk from here at the other side of the park. So Amsterdam is really the city where I'm rooted in. And I've been working as a theater teacher for 30 years. I have been living here in this house together with my husband and the 2 kids, which are now grown and they live their own lives. That's who I am. And I started writing about 12 years ago. Then I started with my debut. To write Shocked Earth, I rented a small house in the middle of nowhere in the very north of Groningen. That's a rural area in the northeast of the Netherlands. And that's where the story develops. And I couldn't have written it elsewhere. I needed to go there and I needed to be there for nearly a year because it's a book about a farmer and a farmer's family. And what I needed was to be really rooted in the nature and in the cultural habitat of that place. And it wasn't enough. Normally I do a little bit of research and I visit a lot of archives and then I start writing. But for this book, I thought, no, I have to be there. I have to walk into the clay. I have to walk in the cold wind. I have to see how and feel how winters are there and how the summer is there and how the corn is growing and the animals are going into the meadows. I wanted to live it all before I started writing. The title refers to what is happening in the province of Groningen. About 60 years ago, in the late 50s, the early 60s, a big gas field was found there. It was at the time it was the biggest gas field of the world. So there was an enormous eagerness to extract the gas out of the ground, and companies like Shell and ExxonMobil, they were contracted to do the job, and the Dutch government had a big share in doing so. So since the early 60s, this gas extraction was a big activity over there. And when it started, there were some people, not very many, but there were some people who warned and said, you can't do this like that because it will damage the earth, it will cause earthquakes and it will harm the houses. These people were put aside by saying that they were madmen, they were pessimistic idiots, they were enemies of the progress, which was in the early 60s a kind of crime. So nobody listened. And when in the 90s the earth started to shake, not very fearsome in the beginning, but it started to shake. And still it was said it had nothing to do with the gas extraction. And so it has been taking a while before, in 2012, with a very big earthquake, nobody could deny anymore. And it was clear that there was a relationship between the earthquakes that were occurring there and the extraction of gas. The family in Shocked Earth exists there is a grandfather, Zwier. He has been raised on the farm. He has married Ootje, the grandmother. And they live there together with Trein, the daughter. And Trein has a daughter, Femke. And Trein, the daughter, when she was young, she hated the farm. She dreamed about another life. She dreamed about going to the city, becoming someone, having a completely different life from not with cows, not with clay, not with... She wanted something different. And so she left the house, and it didn't work out well. So some years later, she returned together with a small baby, and that was Femke. And Femke, she adores living on the farm. She is very much attached to the grandfather, to Sweer, and she is very much attached to animals. She is socially not very easygoing. So she loves the work on the farm. And this little society, well, the whole book is centered around these persons and this family and the way they try to cope together and the way they try to cope with the problems that occur more and more about the earthquakes. Well, I have to say something about fracking, because fracking is a different technique from gas extraction. And I know that I think in the north of England and in the north and in Scotland, the technique of fracking is used. In the north of the Netherlands, it's not fracking, but it's gas extraction. There are two different techniques, but the results can be the same. The result is that damage can be done, and there should be done something about the damage. I don't start with the idea I'm going to write a political book, or what my way of writing is I'm curious to find out something about people. And my experience is that whatever subject you find in this world, it's if you dive deep in a subject, there is always a point that it becomes political, because politics and individual lives, they are connected. In this case, it is connected very, very clearly, because the gas extraction and the way the government reacts on it and the way the government does not help the people who are in trouble makes it a political thing. But my book before this one, about the Vintage Queen, that was also, I didn't have the idea to write about environmental and fashion pollution, not at all. But if you dive into a subject and find out how fashion works, then you end up with also a political situation. Well, Philip Roth, the quote of Philip Roth has a quote: "First I jump up and down on the diving board of the reality before I dive into the water of the fiction." And when I read that quote, I thought, yes, that's exactly the way I'm working. I mean, I think nearly every writer needs to do research, but there are writers who are able to sit for their computer and start writing right away, because out of an emotion or what character or whatever. I need to do a lot of research. I want to find out how things are in reality. And when I've been researching a lot, then I create my own fiction to make the story the strongest as possible. I need the fiction to make the story strong, because and to intensify it. But I have to start in reality. That's my way of working. Shocked Earth was received very well in Groningen. There were a lot of people who told me, finally someone wrote down how the situation is here. And what moved me a lot was that the CAO of a big healthcare organization, she ordered more than 2,000 books to give to everyone in the organization, because she wrote a new preface saying, "This book is about us." Well, that's say something. I still have one example of what a book like this can do. When I was reading in a bookstore on International Bookstore Day, the book wasn't finished yet, but I read a short text in which I described how a house was demolished. And then after this text, one guy stood up and he said, I always thought this whole complaining about the earthquakes were bullshit. But now I feel it. And then I thought, okay, that's what literature should do. Well, my book has been translated in several languages, and the contact with translators is very, very different. Sometimes I don't hear anything from them, and I only know it's translated when the book is in the shop. And sometimes that's what often happens, is that translators start to translate and then mails me a list of with questions. And what I do have to say is translators are the best readers of your work. And that makes me always a little bit nervous, because they read so close and so good that even when I've been rereading my work for thousands times, and the editor did, and other people from the publisher did, then nearly always they find one or more mistakes. So that's that's about translators. My last translation was Shocked Earth, and I have been working very nice together with Antoinette Fawcett. She contacted me in an early stage, and when she was working on the translation, she wrote me, could you give me a map of the farm? So I had to write a map that was only existing in my head, because it was a fictional farm. And I had to design for her how the farm was. And I like that. I never had a question like that before. And after that, we had a lot of contact about her choices. And we discussed some of the choices, and she had a very good insight in how she could make this specific situation in the north of the Netherlands, how she could make it a very clear and for an English public. And I think she did that in a very, very good way. On the second Saturday of the year 1993, Ootje Rosa Corridon announced that a certain farmer and his wife would be coming to tea on Sunday afternoon, and that her daughter was expected to be there. Trein asked her mother what those people were coming for. Ootje didn't look up from the ironing board, where she was ironing starch into her snow-white tablecloth, but she repeated sternly that they were counting on Trein to be there, and told her to dress nicely. In the evening, while Ootje was sweeping, mopping and polishing the parlour, Trein asked her father Zwier what was behind this visit. He tapped out the slow rhythm on the floor with his slippered foot and gazed at the flames flickering behind the blackened mica window of the stove. Better not be too rebellious about it, he said softly, as if his word might pass through the thick walls of the farmhouse. She's doing her best. Her best for what? Trein continued, whispering. What have those old bots got to do with me? Then he stopped tapping his foot and said it wasn't only the farmer and his wife who would be visiting. Their second son would come along too, but that's something you don't know. She means well. He picked up a lock, opened the door of the stove, and carefully placed it on the fire.
Shocked Earth is out on the 13th of May and will be available to buy from all good bookshops. Saskia will be in conversation with translator Antoinette Fawcett to launch the book on the 25th of May. It will be an online event and free to attend, more details to be announced near the time. Now, a huge thanks to all of our authors who shared their work with you today. Jim Crumley, Mandy Haggith, David Howe, Amanda Thompson, Karen Lloyd, Roy Dennis, Jill Hopper, Stephen Moss, Anna Levin and Saskia Goldschmidt. And thank you all for joining us. I hope that you've been inspired by some of the words you've heard today. You can find details of all of today's authors and their books on the Saraband website.